Good afternoon. I appreciate that this is a little bit earlier than I predicted yesterday, but welcome to Prosty Project number 4. As always, you can submit information and resources to me via Twitter, Discord, and indeed you can follow the findings that we have had for this project by following the link in the description. As always, it's not a pleasure to be covering this, but it is a pleasure to have you here with me to help uncover the extent of the scale of all of this scandal that we have going on. But I assume most of you know the score by now, so let's get to it. Nice to see Immaterial and Autocharth in the chat there, and there we are. So we have 33 pages to go through now of J report. It's the last bit. It says 89 of 159. A lot of that is appendices, which we will just skim, because a lot of that is going to be the procedures for how the report was administered. And then we're going to move on to Sarah Champion and John Wedger, which should be interesting. What else did I want to open up here? I've got 3 early reports here, trustee findings, trustee resources, anything else? Oh yes, excuse me 1 second, there we are. Just want to open the tab so that I can see what people are saying in real time. Shouldn't take but a second. And there we go. Alright. Marvellous. Thank you to Extal for renewing your membership. Appreciate that. Righty-ho. It says you have welcome to Foster. Right. Let's get back into this. So, we last time we covered we've been through the chronology, we've been through the scale, we went through the plans to tackle CSE, we went through South Yorkshire Police, we went through the quality of the reporting and the risk assessments, how, again, pretty much Risky Business was the only organisation to hold consistent, standardised records, fall of Risky Business to government standardisation when it was folded into the CSE team. We covered a bit of South Yorkshire Police. We'll be looking more into any further prosecutions that have happened in the area, but as it stands, we only have statistics for 6 prosecutions. And this appears to have been frustrated by the CPS. That's the Crown Prosecution Service, for those of you who are abroad. It's basically the government arm of prosecutions. They were incredibly long. They went through an entire rework, and the boundaries between the authorities shifted to ensure that Rotherham fell on the fault line between 2 boundaries as opposed to 1. And the child sexual exploitation sort of team and the LSCB for that area did ask the CPS, a member of the CPS, to come down and work with them, and they declined pretty much. Then we looked at schools who were failing their young people. Teaching kids about contraception doesn't do very much when they're being raped every weekend. We looked at taxi drivers, about the number of taxi drivers that were operating in the area, the number of operators, and the ways in which the council failed, because it contracted some of these taxi services to transport the at-risk and vulnerable girls, who were then exploited, because of course they were, especially given that from all the reports that we had from 14 to 25-year-olds, they all avoided taxis as much as possible, as well as limousine companies. We had a look at Risky Business, and that was the end of yesterday. So there we are. Right. 4.9 times 5, slight digital background noise. I am using... Let me have a look. I am using audio, there it is. Advanced audio properties. So those properties, different audio properties. I am using, sorry about this, filters, there we go, a VST 2.x plugin. So that's that, REA for standalone. But it's something that Oozloo helped me sort out. It's possible that some of the audio distortion is coming from the Rode, but I will just reset the... Yeah, I can see the lower end stuff there. 1 second. Hopefully, that will have dealt with that. There we go. Okay. Back to the important stuff. How do I keep cool when I realise all this? A lot of it is making sure that I don't necessarily keep cool, right? It's we've noted in the last couple of streams that there have been some real problems. Hello, Emerald Sine. Nice to see you. You must tell me how to pronounce your name. Billy Blogs. It's distressing, but in the same way as a clinician who is diagnosing a patient has to ensure that the facts are laid out on the table and he doesn't take them home with him, in the same way I have to approach this as much as possible. I don't dehumanize the people who are the victims of this, but at the moment I'm assessing what went wrong in varying organisations and who was responsible. And by doing that, I can keep myself away from the emotional part, which is not to say that we don't have times where we get very frustrated and very angry on this stream, because it does happen. And please don't take my my attempt at professionality to be kind of callousness about this stuff, right? So, 3 early reports then. A chapter of a draft report on research into child sexual exploitation in Rotherham, often referred to as the Home Office Report, was written in 2002. It contained severe criticisms of the agencies in Rotherham involved with CSE. The most serious concerned alleged indifference towards ignorance of CSE on the part of senior management. The report also stated that responsibility was continuously placed on the shoulders of young people rather than with the suspected abusers. This is a line we have seen repeated several times in this report and previously. It presented a clear picture of a high prevalence of young women being coerced and abused through prostitution. Senior officers in the police and the council were deeply unhappy about the data and the evidence that underpinned the report. There was a suggestion that the facts had been fabricated or exaggerated. Several sources reported that the researcher was subjected to personalised hostility at the hands of other officials, and she was unable to complete the last part of her research. The content, which senior officers objected to, has been shown with hindsight to be largely accurate. Had this report been treated with the seriousness that it merited at the time by both the police and the council, the children involved then and later would have been better protected and abusers brought to justice. These events have led to suspicions of collusion and cover-ups. Dr. Heal's reports present a vivid and alarming picture of the links between sexual exploitation, drugs, gangs, and violent crime in Rotherham from 2002 to 2006. They were widely distributed to middle and senior managers in all of the key agencies, and there is no record of any formal, specific discussion of these reports in council papers, in ACPC minutes, or in the LSCB minutes made available to the inquiry. That really does raise the hairs on the back of my neck. Absolutely. Yes. Emerald laugh. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Think about it, Mark. It fits perfectly into the left's view that minorities have no agency and cannot be responsible for their actions. Yes, it fits into a theory which has been popularised by a chap called Muscovici, which is the go-to psychological theory, which suggests that minorities are not defined by number but by power, and they can therefore have the categories rewritten however they want to. But that's not the topic of this video. So, how to summarise these 2 paragraphs? So that would be Dr. Heal is the researcher there, so we'll say 3 key papers. Dr. Heal produced 3 papers between 2002 to 2006. As far as I'm aware, we can obviously double check that it is the same person. These papers severely indicted all of the local agencies in Rotherham dealing with CSE. These papers were ridiculed as exaggerated or fabricated. The researcher was harassed and unable to complete the final part of the report. In hindsight, these reports were shown to be entirely accurate. Harassed by government officials, nothing else. Yes. These reports were not examined, discussed, or minuted as part of agended meetings. So, in other words, they were squashed, they were hidden, and they were never discussed, but out of sight, out of mind. Right, what else do we have here? The reports covered in this chapter, the Home Office report. The Home Office Crime Reduction Programme initiated a number of research projects in 2001 throughout England, aiming at providing an evidence base to tackle street prostitution. They reviewed services that were working to protect young people at risk or actively involved in prostitution. So that just makes them sound like they were actually pimping them out themselves, doesn't it? 3 projects in Bristol, Sheffield and Rotherham made up the young people and prostitution part of the research. Each of these had its own focus. The Rotherham focus was on the perpetrators and required a significant amount of profiling to be done. It also drew heavily on 10 case studies of known victims in the town. The Rotherham research was based on risky business, and the researcher was accounted by the council and based in council premises. The Bristol and Sheffield projects were funded from 01 to 03, the Rotherham project from 01 to 02. Final report included a footnote stating that Rotherham had not been funded for a second year due to implementation problems. The University of Luton's final evaluation report omitted the Rotherham project. Damning. A document headed Chapter 4 Key Achievements of the Home Office Pilot made available to the inquiry by the Council referred to the evaluation results of the pilot in Rotherham. Although the town is not named, it provided a descriptive background to CSE within the town going back to 1996. It drew on the work of risky business, referred to as the project in the report. The rest of the report containing the overview is missing. The report is not dated, but we understand that it was written in 2002. Okay. The most prominent report directly involving Rotherham and intending to discover perpetrators, including building profile, was made missing and omitted from a wider study on street prostitution in 2003, including which included failing to continue project beyond 1 year, beyond 2002, citing implementation problems. You found the wrong ethnicities, Jabba. Let's see. The report gave due credit to good practice, noted improvements, blah blah blah. Yes, we know that Risky Business was a good project. Multi-agency training was provided to a wide range of agencies but was not taken up by the police or local magistrates. Now that's an interesting one, given that the previous section on Risky Business discussed how they gave training to various groups. However, this makes clear that certain groups refused the training. So if we add... No, I don't want to bookmark this thing here. It's a very important point. The examples of poor practice and negative attitudes were far more prevalent, including awareness of CSE and interest in it not being widespread. Effective interventions were lacking. Some professionals were working as individuals rather than seeking inter-agency solutions. Information was not being shared between the police and other agencies, and strategy meetings were not being called by children's social care. The mapping exercise devised by Risky Business that cross-referenced the large amount of data on victims and perpetrators was not well received by the police. Interesting statement. No charges were brought against alleged perpetrators, nor was any investigation taken. Important to note this. So, key findings of the 3 papers. We can do that. The police responded reluctantly to missing persons reports as a waste of time. Young women had been threatened with arrest for wasting police time. Young women concerned were often being seen as deviant or promiscuous. The adult men with whom they were found were not questioned. A database was developed to provide consistent recording of CSE-related information across agencies. Owing to a dispute between agencies, it was not used. Possibly as a result of their experience, parents stopped reporting missing children, since it was clearly a waste of time. Professionals were reluctant to be named as sources in the prosecution. They feared for their safety. Some police said that if young people were not prepared to help themselves by making complaints against their abusers, they would take no further action on the case. Despite ACPC procedures, there was no consistent way of addressing the issue of CSE. Many professionals were unaware of it and cautious about working together and sharing information, fearing an increase in workload. Some, especially the police, made personal judgments about the young women involved. Wow. This is the tough stuff, guys. Tough stuff. There is no media coverage about these crimes at the BBC, Guardian, etc. Shame, shame, they really are subversive. The people I see calling it out the most Oh, has something happened to the live stream? My apologies if so. Let me have a look. I can't see anything which happened there. There's been no blip on my side, possibly an internet thing. The people I see calling most attention to it, Majid Nawaz, he's probably the largest at the moment, although there are things going on. I have, at the moment, from only the kind of adjacent information I have, and only on this issue, it has to be noted, but Sarah Champion has just come back from an inquiry, another call for an inquiry, a national inquiry, of the kind which was administered after Stephen Lawrence. Stephen Lawrence, basically, when he... Is it Stephen Lawrence? The chap who died, which caused the Macpherson report in the first place. Yes. Right, so... we have... this here. Let's go back to it. According to the researcher, attempts to raise many of the concerns described above with senior personnel were met with defensiveness and hostility. The researcher gave the inquiry an account of her mounting frustration and concern at the lack of action to pursue perpetrators despite monthly meetings with the police, at which the project consistently provided intelligence about the men concerned. She also had concerns regarding the lack of action taken to protect young people at risk, and conscious that with the end of the pilot study in sight, and with no positive progress in these areas, there were continuing incidents of serious abuse being perpetrated against vulnerable children. She described a particular case as the final straw, also mentioned in Chapter 5. In 2001, a young girl who had been repeatedly raped had tried to escape her perpetrators but was terrified of reprisals. They allegedly put in all the windows in the parental home, broke both of her brother's legs, at which point the child agreed to make a complaint to the police. The researcher took her to the police station where she was interviewed in advance in order to familiarise herself with the place and the officer who would be conducting the interview. Whilst there, the girl received a text from the main perpetrator. He had with him her 11-year-old sister, and said repeatedly to her, "Your choice." The girl did not proceed with the complaint. She disengaged with the pilot and the project, and is quoted by the researcher as saying, "You can't protect me." The incident raised questions about how the perpetrator knew where the young woman was, and what she was doing. Right. The researcher who quit at the end of the pilot study described a case that was her final straw. So there we are. That's and this is why we stay away from case studies as much as possible, aside from when they're going to support our support the project at the end. It's very good and important to read these to get an idea of the scale. At the end of the day, they are anecdotes, but there are commonalities between anecdotes. And unfortunately, we want to get to the national view. We want the macro picture so that we can present. And I intend to. There are several things that we could do. Regarding case studies that I'm considering at this point. Following this incident, the researcher described how she discussed what to do next with her manager and others in the project. It was agreed that she should put her concerns in writing to South Yorkshire Police and the Rotherham District Commander of the Police. This was approved by a manager and a steering group and was hand-delivered to Rotherham Police Station. The inquiry had access to this letter. According to the researcher, this resulted in a meeting with the District Commander and senior council officials, at which she was instructed never to do such a thing again. The content of her letter was never discussed. Right. Fuckers. Prior to the completion of her draft report, the researcher submitted her data to the Home Office. When the senior counsel and police officers saw it, she was suspended on the basis that she committed an act of gross misconduct by including in the data minutes of confidential interagency meetings. A formal meeting took place the following week at which she was reinstated, after she was able to show that the minutes had in fact been handed to Home Office evaluators by her manager. It was also agreed that she would receive a positive reference from the council when her temporary contract terminated. Council also paid for counselling for her. She spent the remainder of her time working on policies and procedures in a room on her own. She was forbidden access to the girls involved and not allowed to attend meetings or have access to further data. Fucking monsters they are, really. According to the researcher, a request made via her manager from senior council officials and the district commander was that she edit the data sent to the Home Office evaluator and remove or rewrite several sections that they judged to be inaccurate or exaggerated. The district commander had a different recollection. Namely, at that time, she suggested editing out any identifying information about the children involved before the report was circulated. The inquiry had access to copies of the researcher's case studies, and they were all appropriately anonymised to protect the identity of the victims. The researcher told the inquiry that she verified the accuracy of her findings and sent the report to Home Office evaluators and senior officials on the last day that she was employed, and did not incorporate any of the changes proposed by officers concerned. Funding was then withheld, and Rotherham was excluded from the final research report, defined as implementation problems. The District Commander of the Police, 2001 to 2005, and I want their name. I want your fucking name. There we go. Noted. Alright, PIB, Thought Criminal, nice to see you. Fine. The District Commander remembered the Home Office report and its criticisms, but recalled nothing of any row surrounding it. Funny that. Nor anything to do with action taken against the researcher. The head of function for safeguarding at the time and several others recalled the police and senior council officers as being very angry about it. See chapter 11. We will look there later. The researcher's line manager, who chaired the meeting to discuss the alleged gross misconduct, thought the whole thing had been badly handled and the researcher was very poorly treated. She confirmed there was a great deal of personal hostility and anger towards the researcher and her work on the part of senior people. Much of what was contained in this report, and in particular criticisms and concerns of the research officer, were confirmed by the inquiry from other sources. The inquiry case file reading exercise covered 6 out of those 10 cases that formed her case studies. Apart from a very small number of minor details, one date was incorrect, a slight variation, we found the case studies to be entirely consistent with our own reading of the files, and we considered them to evidence a high standard of professional judgment and accuracy. The secrecy around this report, The discrepancies in the accounts we received from senior people and the treatment of the researcher were all deeply troubling. They have inevitably led to suspicion of collusion and an intended cover-up. If the senior people involved had paid more attention to the contents of this report, more would have been done to help children who are being violently exploited and abused. Reports by Dr. Angie Heal, Strategic Drugs Analyst. In 2002, she was appointed to carry out research on drug use, drug dealing and related problems in the county, based with South Yorkshire Police, and did her research from 2002 to 2006, producing 2 reports: Sexual Exploitation, Drug Use and Drug Dealing in South Yorkshire, and Violence and Gun Crime, Links with Sexual Exploitation, Prostitution and Drug Markets in South Yorkshire. She was based... the 2 reports had a similar format. They looked at the overall position in South Yorkshire, as well as examining each of the 4 policing areas separately. So that's Rotherham, Doncaster, Barnsley and Sheffield. As a minimum, these reports went to each South Yorkshire Police District Commander, Chief Superintendents, Superintendents in Specialist Crime Services and Community Safety. They also went to drug action coordinators, the NHS, the voluntary sector drug agencies, as well as organisations working with children and adults involved in exploitation and prostitution. They also went to the Central Government Office for the North East. Lastly, they were also sent to the Partnership Police Inspectors that were attached to local authorities. They went to the Community Safety Partnership and the Principal Community Safety Officers in each local authority in the county. So 4 of those. It became clear to Dr. Heal at an early stage that there were very important links between drugs, dealing and sexual exploitation of children, which she continued to highlight throughout her employment. According to the council papers, the information pack provided to those attending drew on Dr. Heal's report for a presentation on sexual exploitation in 2004. The main findings of the 2003 report were: most of the men in South Yorkshire who were involved in sexually exploiting children were also believed to be involved in drug dealing, rape, violence, gun crime, robbery, and other serious criminal offences. Rotherham was described as not having a street scene, but a significant number of girls and boys being sexually exploited. Some of the young women who were being sexually exploited were subject to violence, rape, gang rape, kidnap, carrying drugs, dealing drugs, and situations where firearms were present. 4 brothers who had been targeting young women for their own and others' gratification were identified as the main focus of concern for risky business. The police recalled one 12-year-old who described being taken to a hotel by some men and made to watch whilst her 14-year-old sister was raped. They spoke of another young girl doused in petrol as a threat against reporting sexual offences, and another 14-year-old was selling drugs for one of the main perpetrators, who had been violent towards her and her mother. This man's brother strangled another young girl. A significant number of the girls involved were pregnant, and anger, depression, and acts of self-harm were evident in many from a very early stage. The main findings of the 2006 report were: the situation in Rotherham was described as continuing as it had done for a number of years, with an established sexual exploitation scene, very organised, and involved systematic physical and sexual violence against women, young women in particular. Girls, really. It also involved girls being trafficked to other towns and cities, predominantly in the north. Now that's one of the most important lines, I think. The level of intimidation, physical beatings and rape was considered to be severe. Their situation was very serious. None of the perpetrators were believed to use substances which would contribute to such levels of violence. It was reported that a number of workers in the town involved with the issue believed that one of the difficulties which prevented CSE being dealt with was the ethnicity of the perpetrators. The author emphasised the importance of the attitude taken towards these crimes and to the victims, particularly by the police and children's social care. The most significant recent development had been the rise of reports of guns being seen rather than used by men involved in CSE in Rotherham and Sheffield. And there was a high-profile media campaign about the trafficking from Eastern Europe of young women and girls for the purposes of prostitution. The abuse of local girls for the same purpose was largely ignored. Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading Billy Blogs. What Billy Blogs is saying. Roger Stone, Labour leader of Rotherham Council since 2003, stepped down on Tuesday, saying it was only right he took responsibility for historic failings. He toyed for some time with the idea of not standing for re-election next year. He was given an OBE for services to local government. Meanwhile, pressure continues to pile on Sean Wright, South Yorkshire's Police and Crime Commissioner, over his role as a cabinet member for Children and Young People's Services. He resigned from the Labour Party on Wednesday and has so far refused to leave his 85k a year post, saying that the 63 members of the council should take collective responsibility. His own deputy disagreed and handed in her resignation on Thursday, saying Wright should do the same. Other council executives are also being pressed to explain their role in the scandal and consider their own positions. Right, so I'm just going to put the main findings. I'm feeling pretty murderous at the moment, Andrew Frost. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. All right. Just put this information into the document. I don't feel like omitting anything here will summarise it any better than can already be summarised by that, and it is a summary of an entire paper, so I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to put the second one in. Where is it? Or am I a little bit too far? There it is. And 2006 findings. Apologies for the time taken to do this, just a little bit longer. Right. Again, I'm just going to put down some information. Who they were sent to. And now we're back to it. Right. Issues of ethnicity. If this leaked out to the public without any filtering, yeah. Billy Boggs, current strategic director for children's services, Guardian, Thacker ought to have been a visible and audible presence in the media this week, and yet not a peep. Peep has been heard. Interesting. Issues of ethnicity related to CSE have been discussed in other reports, including the Home Affairs Select Committee report, the report of the Children's Commissioner, which we've already read. Within the Council, we found no evidence of children's social care staff being influenced by concerns about the ethnic origins of suspected perpetrators when dealing with individual cases, including CSE. In the broader organisational context, however, there was a widespread perception that messages conveyed by senior people in council and also the police downplayed the ethnic dimensions of CSE. Unsurprisingly, frontline staff were confused as to what they were supposed to say and do, and what would be interpreted as racist. Ethnicity. Frontline staff were confused due to messaging from senior officials and the police. Asking to downplay ethnic contributions. There was too much reliance on traditional community leaders, such as elected members and imams, being the primary conduit of communication with the Pakistani community. The inquiry spoke to several Pakistani women who felt disenfranchised by this and thought it was a barrier to people coming forward to talk about it. Others believed there was a wholesale denial of the problem in the Pakistani community, in the same way that other forms of abuse were ignored. Representatives of women's groups were frustrated that interpretations of the borough's problems with CSE were based on the assumption that similar abuse did not take place in their own community, and therefore concentrated mainly on young white girls. Both men and women from the community voiced strong concern that other than 2 meetings in 2011, there had been no direct engagement with them about CSE over the past 15 years, and this needed addressing urgently. Census information from 2011 showed that Rotherham had nearly 8,000 people with Pakistani or Kashmiri ethnicity, 3.1% of the borough population, which is an increase from 2% 10 years previously. 77% of this population lived in one of 3 central wards. There are 8 mosques. There are a few references in any minutes to ethnic minorities or migrant families before 2006, when concern was raised about the living conditions of migrant families. Young people were thought to be at risk of physical or sexual abuse for a variety of reasons. Some had been separated from their families. There were also issues of poverty, forced marriage, and child abduction. 12 cases of forced marriage were dealt with in the early months of 2005, the highest in the South Yorkshire police area, and one particular concern was that the girls involved were of a very young age. Where are we? Yes, there we go. As has been stated many times before, there is no simple link between race and CSE. No, of course there isn't. It is between culture and CSE, i.e., it is between religion and ethnic culture, which has been imported from abroad, which is not native to the UK, being directly related to CSE. Across this report, across the UK, the greatest number of perpetrators of CSE are white men, as far as we know. Also, in a country where this particular scandal has been going on, majority white country, sure, majority of criminals are likely to be white, sure, and yet, when it comes to the organised rape and abuse on the basis of race and ethnicity and religion, there is no other group that represents in the way that this group does. The second largest category are those from a minority ethnic background, particularly Asians. In Rotherham, the majority of the known perpetrators were of Pakistani heritage, including the 5 men convicted in 2010. The file reading carried out by the inquiry also confirmed that the ethnic origin of many perpetrators was Asian. In one major case in the mid-2000s, the convicted perpetrator was Afghan. Latterly, some victims of CSE and some perpetrators originated from the Roma Slovak community, and a steady increase in the number of child protective cases involving Roma children, mainly in the category of neglect. Work with Roma families was one of the 6 priorities of the CSE subgroup. The Roma population in Rotherham was proportionally much larger than in larger areas, such as Bradford and Manchester. By March 2012, the Children Protection Profile showed that Rotherham had more than double the English average for Roma Slovak families being referred under Section 47 of the Child Act. 89, that is the neglect section. Weird to put it in here. That's all I'll say on that. Weird to put it in there. Dr. Heel, in her 2003 report, stated that in Rotherham, the local Asian community are reported to rarely speak about the perpetrators. It was taboo, and local people were equally frightened of the violent tendencies of the perpetrators as the young women they abused. In her 2006 report, she described how the appeal of organised sexual exploitation of Asian gangs had changed. In past, it had been offered for personal gratification, whereas now it evolved career and financial opportunities to young Asians who got involved. She also noted that Iraqi Kurds and Kosovan men were participating in organised activities against young women. In her 2006 report, she stated that it is believed by a number of workers that one of the difficulties that prevented this issue from being dealt with effectively is the ethnicity of the perpetrators. She also reported in 2006 that young people in Rotherham believed at the time that the police dared not act against Asian youths for fear of allegations of racism. This was echoed at the present time by young people we met during the inquiry, but not supported by specific examples. Several people interviewed expressed the general view that ethnic considerations had influenced the policy response by the council and the police rather than in individual cases. One example was given by Risky Business project manager, who reported that she was told not to refer to the ethnic origins of perpetrators whilst carrying out training. Other staff in children's social care said that when writing reports on CSE cases, they were advised by their managers to be cautious about referring to the ethnicity of the perpetrators. Okay. That will be Jane Senior, I imagine. Let me just pop this in here on the end of the 2006 report. So, Dr. Heel. And in 2003. This is what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when you end up with a 2-tier policing system. Let me see. binary surface, just send me some information. Current. You are welcome to join me for an additional chat. If you are in my Discord, please put a message in general. I'll give you appropriate permissions and we'll sort out you coming on. Where is this? There we go. Let me see what chat is saying. If there are 8,000 Pakistanis in Rotherham, how many must be involved? We don't know. PIB, it's no longer restricted to London or Birmingham. Yes, there are 27 cities officially implicated. There are 72 towns and cities unofficially implicated. And the single common denominator is Islam. Specifically, Pakistani culture and fundamentalist Islam. But there are, as Majid Nawaz has said, it's also coming from North African, Somali, Iraqi, Kurdish, and Kosovan Muslims as well. Right. Let's carry on. All of the senior officers we interviewed were asked whether or not ethnic considerations influenced decision-making. Well, funnily enough, all were unequivocal this didn't happen. So, 5-10 years ago, were you racist? Were you deliberately making decisions which involved the rape of young children based on their race? Were you? No? You're denying it? Oh, really? Interesting. However, several of those involved in the operational management of services reported attempts to pressurise them to changing their approach on some issues. The snitches get stitches. This mainly affected the support given to Pakistani heritage women fleeing domestic violence. A small number of counsellors demanded that social workers reveal the whereabouts of these women, or effect reconciliation, rather than supporting the women to make up their own minds. The inquiry team was confident that ethnic issues did not influence professional decision-making in individual cases. So they were only concerned about it when it was the brown women. That was the only time it was of any note to them. Great. Frontline staff did not report personal experience of attempts to influence their practice or decision-making because of ethnic issues. Those who had involvement in CSE were acutely aware of the issue and recorded general nervousness about discussing them for fear of being thought racist. Good work was done by officers in developing a protocol on child protection issues in the mosques in 2008. Each mosque had a designated person responsible for child protection, and training was provided for imams and others. The current chair of the Rotherham Council of Mosques made strenuous efforts to widen the representation on his council to include women, and demonstrated a strong personal commitment to dealing with child protection and CSE. He was very disappointed not to have had contact with the Safeguarding Board in the past, but was encouraged by recent discussions. The issue of race, regardless of ethnic group, should be tackled as an absolute priority if it was known to be a significant factor in the criminal activity of organised abuse in any local community. There was little evidence of such action being taken in Rotherham in the early years. Councillors played an effective role in this, especially those representing communities in question, but they didn't act as facilitators of communication, rather barriers to it. Several councillors they interviewed believed that they had opened up about these issues by giving oxygen to racist perspectives would in turn attract extremist political groups and threaten community cohesion. Children are being raped. To some extent, this concern was valid, with the targeting of the town by groups such as the EDL, because children were being raped. The deputy council leader 2011 to 2014 from the Pakistani community was clear that he had not understood the scale of the problem until 2013. He then disagreed with colleagues on the best way to approach it and advocated tackling it head-on, but was overruled. He said he was one of the elected members who had said they thought criminal convictions in 2010 were a one-off isolated case and not an example of a more deep-rooted problem of Pakistanis targeting young white girls. This was at best naive and at worst ignoring a politically inconvenient truth. And even then he was still shot down. Where is this? Let's have a look. Both the council and the police used traditional channels of communication with the Pakistani community for many years on general issues of child protection. There seemed, from all accounts, to be very few, if any, specific discussions of CSE. These contacts were also almost exclusively with men. One of the local Pakistani women's groups described how Pakistani girls were being targeted by taxi drivers and older men lying in wait outside school gates at dinner times and after school. They cited cases in Rotherham where Pakistani landlords befriended Pakistani women and girls on their own for sex. They would then pass their name on to other men who contacted them for more sex. The women and girls feared reporting such incidents to the police because it would affect their future marriage prospects. Okay. The UK Muslim, again, there's no understanding of scale here either. The UK Muslim Women's Network produced a report of 35 whole case studies of women across the UK who were victims, majority Muslim. It highlighted that Asian girls were being sexually exploited where authorities failed to identify or support them, most vulnerable to men from their own communities who manipulated cultural norms to prevent them from reporting their abuse. It's described how this abuse was being carried out. Usually involved men operating in groups, the victim was passed around and prostituted amongst many other men. Our research also showed that complex grooming hierarchies were at play. Physical abuse included oral, anal and vaginal rape, role play, insertion of objects into the vagina, severe beatings, burning with cigarettes, tying down, enacting rape that included ripping off the clothes, and sexual activity over webcam. The description mirrors the abuse committed by Pakistani heritage perpetrators on white girls in Rotherham. The Deputy Children's Commissioner's report reached a similar conclusion, yes, stating one of these myths was that only white girls are victims of sexual exploitation by Asian or Muslim males, as if these men only abuse outside of their own community driven by hatred and contempt for white females. This belief flies in the face of evidence that shows that those who violate children are most likely to target those closest to them and the most easily accessible. The Home Affairs Select Committee quoted witnesses saying that cases of Asian men grooming Asian girls did not come to light because victims are alienated and ostracized by their own families and the community if they go to public with allegations of abuse. Interesting. Again, we don't have the numbers, and one would suggest that, like, I don't doubt that this is going on. It's just a question of scale. But lo and behold, Asian or Muslim males abusing everyone inside. And there was definitely a racial component, especially when it came to the abuse. So I don't find this to be particularly accurate, but we'll see. With hindsight, it's clear that the women and girls in the Pakistani community... Right, so let me just put... this here, and J report claims that the idea that these men is a myth. Okay. With hindsight, it's clear that they should have been encouraged and empowered. Safeguarding Board recently received a presentation from the local Pakistani women's group about abuse within their community. They want to address as a priority the underreporting of exploitation and abuse in minority ethnic communities. We recommend that the relevant agencies immediately initiate dialogue about CSE with minority ethnic communities, and in particular with the Pakistani community, in consultation with local women's groups, developing strategies that support young women and girls from the community to participate without fear or threat. They were understaffed. We now meet the targets. Budget was quite low. But looked after children were 26% higher than other places. Again, not particularly relevant for us. Rotherham lost a third of its spending power due to local authority funding changing. Okay. Role of elected members and senior officers of the council. Let's see. In the early years, there seems to have been some prevalent denial of the existence of CSE in the borough, let alone its increasing incidence and dangers. By 2005, it's hard to believe that any senior officers or members from the leader and the chief executive downwards were not aware of the issue. What's this? Okay. Most members showed little obvious leadership or interest in CSE for much of the period under review, apart from their continued support for risky business. Possible reasons for this aren't clear, but may include denial that this could occur in Rotherham, concern that the ethnic element would damage community cohesion, children were being raped, worry about reputational risk to the borough, your borough is full of child rapists, if the issue was brought fully into the public domain, and the belief that if it occurred it might compromise police operations that aren't going on because children are being raped and you don't want to report it. For much of the time, senior officers did little to keep members fully informed of the scale and seriousness of the problem, on occasion telling members they believed it was exaggerated. Again. So, senior staff. In the early years, a small group of frontline professionals from the council, police and health worked together on CSE, both on individual cases and multi-agency procedures, alerting senior staff to the scale of the abuse, but were met with disbelief and left with little management support for the good work they were trying to do. There are reports that senior staff conveyed that sexual exploitation and the ethnicity of perpetrators should be played down. This seemed to be reinforced by the police. The source of this attitude cannot easily be identified, but concern about the resources that CSE should consume, greater priority given to the protection of younger children, professional jealousies, and personal attitudes of some council staff and police towards the girls involved have all been cited as reasons for the failure to address the seriousness and the scale of the problem. If they really wanted to prevent this sort of thing, giving people a reason to be racist, they'd realise the only solution is to solve the problem itself so it can't fuel the fire, as it were. Yes, they're dealing with symptoms, not addressing the root cause. The same way that they're not happy that Tommy Robinson exists. Funnily enough, if you deal with the rape going on in your communities, start policing people accurately and effectively, and there's that. The prevailing culture at the most senior levels of the council was bullying and macho, not an appropriate climate in which to discuss rape and sexual exploitation. From 2009, they took a strong personal interest in tackling CSE. Okay. This chapter examines leadership and management contribution of elected members and senior officers and how their actions impacted on the way in which CSE was handled within the borough. There were 5 chief executives on the council, including another who acted up in the role for brief periods from 1997. All were interviewed in the course of the inquiry. 3 issues were common. The overriding priority of the council was economic regeneration and addressing unemployment. The council rarely had enough resources to address the needs of its population, and that service priority for improvement was education, in particular schools. 2 chief executives in post until 2000 recalled nothing about CSE being an issue during their tenure. The chief executive described himself as genuinely shocked and surprised at what had emerged. He had no recollection of it being raised as a major issue. His memory of risky business was also slight, regarding it as being on the margin of the council's activity. He recalled that the Home Office research and report were treated as anecdotal, using partial information and not methodologically sound, and the police were very angry about it. His successor was aware of risky business and the presentations. Taking account of the advice he received, he recognised there was a problem of CSE, but he had no reason to believe that the problem was greater than anywhere else. He had a vague recollection about the task and finish group chaired by the council leader, did not recall hearing Angie Heal's reports in 03 and 06, the first chair of the Rotherham Children's Safeguarding Board for a period of 18 months, but CSE didn't feature in the board's work in that time. He described tensions amongst the main agencies, mostly between the NHS and Children's Social Care. There were stark differences in thresholds for intervention, in which CSE was not mentioned as a priority. A main focus of his time as chief exec was to improve external partnership working, which he believed had been achieved by 2009. External partnership had been poor, with the council perceived as overbearing and too dominant. He believed that relations with the police and other agencies had improved markedly over his tenure. He could not recall his Director of Education raising concerns with him in 2004 about the police response to problems in secondary schools as referred to below. Present Chief Exec from 2009 onwards, I don't know if he's still in office, reported that at the time of his appointment CSE was not mentioned as one of the key challenges he would have to face. Nor did the previous Chief Exec alert him to the issue, nor were other major problems with the Council's budget raised. The Ofsted report that led to the government putting the Children's Safeguarding Services into intervention in 2009 did not mention CSE. He knew about it in the context of safeguarding and that Operation Central had taken place. He also became aware of the issue at the time of the murder of child S, when the senior investigating police were adamant that it was not linked to CSE, but was instead an honour killing. That was the message that the council leader followed. The next relevant event for him was Operation Shard, in which there were 11 arrests but no prosecutions. His own early assessment was that the council was not willing or self-aware enough to face all the problems it had, and the approach generally was not to rock the boat. Again, that's that. When he arrived, he thought that the whole of Children's Social Care appeared to be in denial about its problems. Several people confirmed that the Chief Exec took a direct interest in the change and improvement process required in the Children and Young Services team from 2010 onwards. He provided excellent support during a difficult period. Did I just say teach them not to get raped? I don't believe so. I'll just double check. my own reading now, 2 minutes ago. No, I don't think I said anything about teaching to be rape or not. It seems we have the numbers, but IRL interaction is important to promote confidence and confidentiality. Are you talking about the police numbers, or are you talking about social services, or what? Their PIB. From 1997 to 2005, there was a Department of Social Services in the Council. Following legislation, children's and adult social services were split, and children's social care was combined with education to form a joint Department of Children's Services. Very grand. All were interviewed for the inquiry. There were 4 post holders and a 5th who took it up in 2014. There was an increasing knowledge and awareness of CSE from the late 90s, but only amongst a small number of frontline staff. The Key Players Group was set up to maintain an overview of the situation and continued until 2003, chaired by the ACPC Child Protection Coordinator, discussing individual cases, mapping networks of perpetrators from available intelligence. None of the meetings of minutes from this group have survived. Again, incompetence or malicious intent. The law of abrogation negates the peaceful verses in favour of the violent passages. Yeah. In 2012, the Rotherham Council sent a 12-year-old girl on Urdu Punjabi courses to educate her. Gross. We spoke to some members of the Key Players Group, gained the impression of dedicated professional people who understood the severity of the problem and were not listened to. They drafted the first set of interagency procedures for CSE, which were adopted by the ACPC. They had high hopes that this recognition was going to lead to senior people in their agencies giving the issue more attention and resources. It did not. From then on, it all seemed to go backwards. You were made to feel like you were making a fuss about these girls, said one member. Senior managers slimmed down the membership, revised the remit, and another opportunity was lost for agencies concerned to confront the true scale of the issue and give it the support that it needed. Let me just grab this paragraph. In 01 to 02, Director of Education, 01 to 05, was one of the first senior officers to raise concerns about CSE with the police. The heads of 3 secondary schools had told her of their concerns about young girls being picked up at the school gates by taxi drivers, and their suspicion was that this was for abuse. Police watched the schools in unmarked cars for a period of time, but the problem persisted. This was raised 3 times with the police at a senior level. On the last occasion, she was shown a map of the north of England overlaid with various crime networks, including guns, drugs, and murder, and told that the police were only interested in putting resources into catching the ringleaders who perpetrated these specific crimes. She was told that if they were caught, her local problems would cease. She found this an unacceptable response which ignored the abuse of children. Her chair at the time also raised the issue with the police, according to the officer. The district commander, 01 to 05, again I want his name and his head on a platter, could not recall these conversations but was a player of the police action within secondary schools. So again, that paragraph. From an early stage, children's social care managers seemed reluctant to accept the extent of the problem of CSE within the borough. There were constant difficulties over the allocation of referrals from risky business. Sexual Exploitation Forum minutes in 2004 indicated concerns raised by Risky Business that referrals were being reclassified as teenager out of control. A further minuted example was that of a project worker attempting to make a referral and being told that she had to have witnessed the incident herself as a third party because third-party information... she had to have witnessed the incident herself as third-party information could not be accepted. Long-standing tensions between Risky Business and children's social care are described in Chapter 9. As already stated, the clear responsibility for resolving these tensions lay with those in charge of children's social care and youth services who failed to do so for many years. Again, useful paragraph. From 2003 onwards, directors of safeguarding were regularly reporting problems with recruitment and retention. Funny that. Yeah. So funny that you can't recruit people in to work in social services when they know that they're going to have to deal with this onslaught problem and it's an understaffed area. And you can't keep hold of your social services people because they know that you're attempting to prevent them from dealing with child rape. I can't say I'm surprised there was a retention crisis. Staffing problems persisted in one form or another until 2010. A 2003 Social Services Inspectorate report found that core services under pressure and not fully appreciated by the council. Their children's social care received 1-star gradings in 2003 and 2004. In 2004, a report taken to the Cabinet Member for Social Services advised that vacancy levels meant it was not possible to allocate a number of cases and the budget would be overspent. It was recommended that monthly rather than quarterly reports be submitted in order to monitor concerns. A joint paper from Police and Children and Young People Services was taken to the Safeguarding Board proposing significant changes to Rotherham's service delivery response to CSE. And it was recommended that Risky Business became a multi-agency resource in 2006. That the Sexual Exploitation Forum became more strategic rather than discussing individual cases, and it was agreed that the forum would produce an annual report. Now, interesting that Risky Business, you're not sure, are you? You don't know whether or not they're going, wow, Risky Business, the only people who are producing results, right? The only people that people seem to trust, let's fold them into our infrastructure so that they will trust us as an extension of Risky Business, or whether or not they said Risky Business are causing a lot of trouble for us. And there's a lot of conflict between them and social services. If they are the same organisation, then there can't be that conflict anymore, can there? I imagine that's the thought process that was going there. Or at least the justification, right? The police carried out an audit of 87 files in 2005, which resulted in them proposing a large number of girls be removed from monitoring. Risky Business challenged the factual accuracy and completeness of the information in the orbit, raising serious concerns about many of the girls involved, where it was recommended that they be removed from monitoring. The police claimed that they removed them because they were pregnant or had given birth. All looked after children were removed from the list as well. Several of the cases were removed from monitoring, read by the inquiry, and found Risky Business's concerns to be valid, right? Police removed many girls from monitoring because they were pregnant or had given birth, despite Risky Business raising serious, valid concerns. It is hard to avoid the conclusion that the police, supported by children's social care, were intent on reducing the number of names on forum monitoring for CSE because it made them look better. The minutes of the Sexual Exploitation Forum in 05 and 06 showed continuing tensions between risky business and social care over the removal of these girls if they became child protection cases or were followed up by social care. There were also concerns reported about strategy meetings not being convened when risky business requested them. A report to the Safeguarding Board in 07 stated there were no children on the Child Protection Register due to issues of sexual exploitation, and only 2 had been identified as at risk. Given the large number of referrals for CSE known about within the statutory agencies at that time, and the seriousness of the circumstances of individual children, these figures suggest that the Council was failing to protect them. There is no record in the minutes of any challenge to these figures. So I'm going to take this, pop this here, and I say falsified statistics. By 08 and 09, more committed and focused leadership on CSE was apparent. The Children and Young Person Services, the appointment in 07 of a part-time lead for CSE contributed to this. This was seen as a positive influence on the difficulties between risky business and social care staff, especially in individual cases. She was the only straight pathway to social work. She told the inquiry that it was certainly conveyed by senior managers that the extent of CSE was being exaggerated. A divide amongst senior managers was also obvious. CSE was not seen as a priority, especially by operational locality managers who thought risky business were exaggerating and had a high volume of competing priorities to meet. Her unequivocal view was that the project accurately reflected the scale and seriousness of the problem, even if their presentation was sometimes unorthodox. From 05 onwards, the Director of Safeguarding was the strategic blah 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 blah. In the structure of children's services at the time, others at a similar level had their own interests and responsibilities overlapping safeguarding. A lot of infighting was reported amongst 7 directors of children's services. Seven. At what time? From 05 onwards. They then went on to focus on co-located services. 7 localities were created, 2 managers each. Frontline staff whose jobs were affected were not ready for this culture change. It consumed a large amount of staff time and energy. It was seen as diverting staff from their core functions. It didn't conclude until 09. Vacancy rate was around 37 to 40%, but was never under 14%. The Ofsted Joint Area Review report in 06 was very positive. It contained the astonishing statement that it appeared that vulnerable children and young people were kept safe from abuse and exploitation, but this was not qualified in any way, nor an accurate reflection of the situation, and may have served to give false reassurance to those running the service. Ofsted's evaluation declined. Following the success of Ops Central, Obzar went on, we know that was unsuccessful. Sorry, about being quiet, folks. Children's social care have had no previous experience of activity. Girls didn't trust them. They removed girls from home, then returned them within days. Many became closed cases very quickly. They had no support. Nobody knew what they were supposed to be doing, just firefighting. We attended a lot of meetings, and we were always 10 paces behind the perpetrators. So everyone involved wanted to do a good job, but it was all very badly managed. Police officers responsible for CSE in Rotherham considered that police input to the CSE team was clear and understood. They gave it 6 detectives. This is future sort of 09 onwards. Joint work is sometimes delayed because children's social care is under-resourced compared to the police. But eventually they were properly staffed. In 04 to 05, a series of presentations were made to counsellors. These were unambiguous about the nature and extent of the problem. They included a description of CSE and its impact on children as young as 12. Scale of the problem, not noted here, again, interestingly. The exercise of control through drugs, rape and physical force. In Rotherham, 55% of abused children used heroin at least once a week. 40% had been raped. 73% had sexual health problems. A third attempted suicide, most self-harmed. And the section on perpetrators mentioned Asian families involved with taxi firms and identified 50 people, 45 of whom were Asian, 4 were white, 1 African Caribbean. 50 people. Note that 50, because only 6, as far as we are aware, have been taken to court and prosecuted. 50 people. And this is back then, and this is with a minimum of information at a time when they were trying to squash this entirely. Not search Google, I want to copy it. Thank you. Attendees were provided with background information listing the known addresses of alleged activity, including hotels and takeaways in Rotherham. Also talked about the taxi companies alleged to be involved and a case study of 3 girls. Risky Business supported 319 girls over an 18-month period between 04 and 05. The presentation was made at the end of 04 to the Rotherham Children and Young People's Board, with 6 counsellors project, including the leader. So, again, this is an interesting thing to take away. I want to know who these people are. Who are these people? Oh, 4 to 05. In response to growing concerns about sexual exploitation in Rotherham, a task and finish group was set up in 04, chaired by the leader of the council. Only 1 minute of its meetings was available, though other meetings contained references to this group's work. The March minute listed a number of actions, including multi-agency training, a local publicity campaign, and appointing a coordinator on the issue, although it didn't happen for 2 years afterwards. In November 05, the chair of the Children and Young People's Voluntary Sector Consortium expressed concern of the problem of CSE in Rotherham, and recalled that members of the consortium gave evidence to the Task and Finish group on March 2nd. The consortium was not represented at any meetings after that. She requested a progress report on the group's work, but it's not been found. The group agreed that more awareness around CSE needed to be provided within the Child Protection Training Programme. There is no further record of the group's meetings, its outputs, or how it ceased to exist. At several points from the early noughties onwards, members increased the funding to Rescue Business in recognition of its work, also responded to the funding pressures experienced by children's social care over the years by affording protection to the service where significant savings were required, in particular from 2008 onwards. Nevertheless, it should be noted that Rotherham started at a lower base of funding for children's social care compared to its neighbours, and whatever protection afforded did not fully compensate for the underlying lack of investment and rising demand. The lead member of CYP, who later became the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner, was aware of CSE from the outset of his tenure and believed that reports on the subject were taken seriously and acted upon. He also stated that race was never presented to him as an obstacle for investigation. Conservative councillor requested a meeting with the council leader at which he expressed his concerns. He told the inquiry that the council leader advised him the matters were being dealt with by the police and requested he did not raise them publicly. CSE training sessions were given in 2012-13 with the attendance of 60 of 63 councillors. Interviews with senior members revealed that none could recall the issue ever being discussed in the Labour group until 2012. So here we get to the party aspect of it. Given the seriousness of the subject, the evidence available with the reputational damage to the council, it is extraordinary that the Labour group, which dominated the council, failed to discuss CSE until then. Some senior members acknowledged this was a mistake, asked if they should have done things differently. They thought that as an administration they should have tackled the issues head on, including any concerns about ethnicity. Politicians, eh? Just going to pop that additional line in there. The terms used by many people we spoke to about how those in authority dealt with CSE were sweeping it under the carpet, turning a blind eye, keeping a lid on it. One person of the past said of the past, the people above just didn't want to know. They'd rather be blind to it than address it. Yeah. In September 2013, the council leader apologised unreservedly to those young people who'd been let down by safeguarding, which prior to 2009 simply weren't good enough. He reiterated it was the highest politics. They established a new board called the Scrutiny Board. It was not easy for the Commission to maintain its independence because most of the members belonged to one party. She recalled raising the issue of CSE in 2008 with the lead member and director of Children's Services, specifically about why certain things had not been done. She was given assurance that all was in hand and that she would be informed on a need-to-know basis. She asked again in 2009 and received the same message in 2008. So this is before. That one. blah, 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 blah. Accountability. Reading minutes is not the same as witnessing the meetings themselves. The same items seem to have to go through an inordinate number of council meetings and other bodies before being accepted. Admittedly, there is need to know in many instances, but more important is the possibility that this arrangement blunts accountability. Any issue or responsibility that belongs to everybody effectively belongs to nobody, and in the case of CSE, accountability was key. Scrutiny panels failed. Some people we interviewed suspected that a small number of those with political authority in the council had links to the perpetrators through taxi firms and other businesses and family interests. We were told by the police there was no evidence to support these suspicions. We'll see what comes out in the 5-6 years since this report. Organisational culture. As far back as 1998, the chief executive was able to say senior women officers were not readily accepted, but had no sense of a particularly macho culture, but was aware of a small number of aggressive and intimidating senior councillors. The leader of the council from 2000 to 2003 agreed the culture overall was macho and sexist. He referred specifically to 3 members accessing adult pornography on council computers, which he had to deal with. He referred to the bullying behaviour of some members towards the then chief exec, probably because he and the chief exec were attempting to improve and modernise an underperforming council, which was very traditional, slow to change, blah blah blah. One of the current cabinet members who had been in the council since 1999 agreed with the description of bullying and strong male dominance. Of the group of people interviewed, many confirmed this perception. Right. A succession of senior officers, past and present, male and female, who were interviewed for the inquiry raised negative culture as being an issue from 1997 to 2009. Their remarks and some of the less offensive quotations from a small number of senior officers and members are given below. Member barometer, RE sexual managers was screwed, it was very grubby. Colleague was told that she ought to wear short skirts to get better. You women are only fit for cooking, washing and darning. I know what I'd like to do to you if I was 10 years younger. A senior member asked me if I wore a mask whilst having sex. Again. One of the senior managers in safeguarding stated she wrote to a previous chief exec more than once about the conduct of members. The inquiry was able to obtain copies of these letters. They went missing. The existence of such a culture is likely to have impeded the council from providing an effective response. A senior official not from safeguarding services was quoted in saying that in his professional view, Rotherham had too many looked after children, and this accounted for a significant part of their overspend. When challenged for his evidence, he became aggressive and antagonistic and was asked to stop shouting. He claimed that shouting was the only way to get through to these people and persisted for over an hour, swearing frequently, with no intervention from the chair, according to the letter. The director of safeguarding described the experience as being intimidating, humiliating, bullying, and entirely professionally unacceptable. And she concluded by saying she only felt able to put this in writing because she left the authority. Okay. Believe that's the end of that, because we're not going through recommendations. We're only interested in what has happened. If there is another report, it will describe what has happened before. And again, recommendations to the report board. Is this a full chronology? Oh no, legal and policy context. Methodology and terms of reference. There we go. Alright. So that is the J report, ladies and gentlemen. That is done there. There's a whole... Well, it seems to be... It was a lot longer than the previous one, wasn't it? I think that's 7... 9... Yeah. 12 pages of summaries from a 159 page report. So there we go. Right. There we go. Right, I am going to go grab myself a glass of water. I'm going to go and probably have a smoke, we'll see. And I will see you guys in about 5 minutes, alright? Right. Let's get back to... where were we? Let's see. We were at the Sarah Champion. That's where we wanted to go to next. I'm aware we have all of these mainly contemporary media sources, common and mainstream media sources, but I'm curious about Sarah Champion. Sarah Champion. I've sent her an email hoping to see if she's got anything which can substantiate this, but let's have a look, see. 1 million child victims, potentially. So, at least 1,400 children were sexually exploited, as emerged from the J report. Sarah Champion, City's Labour MP, spelled incorrectly, thinks there could be up to 1 million victims, calling it a national disaster requiring an established task force to deal with the horror. Let's see what we've got here. The reason for the covering up of events is attributed to the fear of the race issue, as many of the perpetrators are Pakistani, and as we've seen, police refuse to believe allegations. So let's have a look. Nothing here. Let's have a look. Do we have the Wayback Machine? Does it work? Again, this URL has been excluded from the Wayback Machine. Interesting. Why? Again, nothing clear from that, right? Mirror reported on it. Sarah Champion called for it. BBC. Do we have a video associated, or is it just... no? Okay. Police probe has done this. This is 2019, calling for extra children's services funding. The number of children in care has risen from 407 to 634. We are on our knees begging for your support. Third highest increase in the number of children in care. If there had been an earthquake affecting the lives of 1,400 children in Rotherham, we would have emergency funding, but we don't get any. Operation Stovewood, something to look into then. Run by the National Crime Agency, working with 296 victims, 151 suspects, and running 22 ongoing investigations. 14 convictions so far and 24 charges. But nothing there. Let's have a look and see what Operation Stovewood turns up. Thank you for all sticking with me through this as well. I appreciate it. Single largest law enforcement. And again, this is the largest one, and they've only managed, what was it? Not this one. It's only managed 14 convictions since 2014. Yeah, since 2014. They have 200 officers working on this based in South Yorkshire. 20 people have been convicted. They've been around. Those convicted have been handed to prison sentences totaling 250 years, but that's 20 people, 12 and a half years each on average. So, Operation Stovewood. Nothing much that I can see in there. Just a notice that they will be doing it. And that the purview of it is still 1997 onwards, because we just don't have information about it after that. Established in 2014 in response to the J report. Approximately 200 officers currently working on 22 I can't take the 22 ongoing investigations. So that source there. 50 convictions of an average 12.5 years each since its inception. Why that isn't 2,500 years, I don't know. Specific to Rotherham. Okay. So that's that. Let's go back to see what the Sun has to say. Let's see. British Pakistani men are raping, exploiting white girls. It's time we faced up to it. So there's a Newcastle sex gang here. When was this released? 2017. I'm amazed at how long it's taken for this to become even tabloid news. Sean Wright is obviously got problems. Two and a half years later, warm words but no action. I wish that we had a source for this. So, that. Let's have a listen to this. Hinchster, thank you very much for the 20. Thank you very much for the £20. Great work. Keep yourself fit and well. This subject would depress a saint. Thanks. Thank you very much. That's very generous of you. Hopefully it will go towards the project. Yeah.
A survivor of child sexual exploitation from Rotherham. I have had justice. My perpetrators were Pakistanis, and I can always remember I actually reported my abuse 14 years ago. I went to the authorities, my parents did. I sat and did video interviews to the police. I was willing to work with them, and I never once looked at my perpetrators for what race or religion they were. I just simply stated who they were who committed these crimes against me and what they'd done. And as soon as I said the name, I was made to feel as though I was racist and I was the one who'd sort of got the problem. And that had continued all the way up to the J report actually coming out in Rotherham. And it was a way to sort of silence me as well, because I knew I wasn't racist. But I felt like it was used as a way to silence.
Again, this would be a useful video address.
Five Britons have tested positive for coronavirus in France. The 4 adults.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm in Rotherham. I'm a survivor of child sexual exploitation.
Yes. Copy video address. Video from LBC call-in from a victim claiming she was called racist for reporting on her abusers 14 years ago. So that was 2005, presumably. If this is 2017, then 14 years ago from 2017, 2003. Samuel Woodhouse appears to be doing stuff. Suffered abuse from her boyfriend, Rashid Hussain, when she was 14. She wrote a book called Just a Child. Now a public speaker and campaigner, speaking out about this abuse. She was pregnant twice, was aborted at 14, had a child at 15 when he was jailed. She used the pseudonym Jessica, but waived her anonymity, spoke with the BBC Loosewell and Good Morning Britain about her experience, now trying to implement Sammy's Law, hoping to ensure children will not be charged for crimes they committed at the hands of abuse. He was jailed for only 35 years for 23 offences, including rape and indecent assault of 9 victims, including an 11-year-old. Sentenced alongside 5 others, including his brothers, for a total of 102 years. I will have to pick up this book from Amazon, I think. It will be useful. Right. Now, the other person I wanted to get onto to talk about today is John Wedger. We're going to have a listen to this sort of thing. The father was arrested for potentially committing a hate crime. Oh, of course he was. Afternoon, British night, diving deeper into unending despair, I see, only in the usual sense. Victims were made to feel racist, yes. Right. So, yes, let's go John Wedger inquiry. Did I have the YouTube video? There's a debunked section here, that would be interesting. When we get to that. Where is it? It might be on my YouTube history, actually. 1 second. None of you get to have a look at my YouTube history. See what degeneracy that I have there. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Debunked. This one.
Kevin, unlimited overtime. When I was on child abuse.
So this is John Wedger's thing. This is the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. International Tribunal for National Justice, did I say? Or Natural? Natural Justice. Natural Justice. This was ITJ 2000 and mirrored from this channel. What's this channel? All videos are available. This June 4th, 2018. Unless it says something different. April, but still 2018.
John Wedger is a police whistleblower. As a CID officer, he discovered back coverings on child sex trafficking networks, which led to an investigative inquiry by the Independent Police Complaints Commission, delving into the...
I will just put some headphones on so you don't get doubled up audio. On this... I've listened to this twice now, I think, but I've not taken notes so far. So that's what the main purpose of this will be.
He is one of the bravest men in the country today, by many people's reckoning. John Wedger, thank you for joining us. Please speak freely to this commission.
I'm recently retired from the Metropolitan Police, where I served as a detective. I specialised in child abuse investigations, and what is relevant to me being here today was my service whilst on the Specialist Vice Unit. I had been asked to look into an allegation made by a 14-year-old girl that she is being used as a prostitute. On looking into it, it appeared that this girl was one of many. She gave me another girl, who in turn gave me another, and it just spiraled. Very, very quickly, we had dozens of young kids aging from 9 to 14 years old. All of them were subject to care orders, either looked after or, in placements, homes or whatever, but all known to the social services. A lot of them were known to the police for being missing persons and everything else. And all of them were addicted to crack cocaine and heroin, and were all being pimped out, as the term goes, by one person, which was a female prostitute who was very well known to the Met Police. And this woman had alleged connections with high-ranked officers, and also a local magistrate, and someone that was high up in executive status in the BBC. This woman seemed to work with impunity for many, many years, and when looking into it, this actual racket had been going on for a long, long time.
Okay. Just want to make sure that I get that correctly.
Ranked officers pimped out, as the term goes, by one person, which was a female prostitute who was very well known to the Met Police. And this woman had alleged connections with high-ranked officers, and also a local magistrate, and someone that was high up in executive status in the BBC. This woman seemed to work with impunity for many, many years, and when looking into it, this actual racket had been going on for a long, long time. What I did was I exposed my findings. I committed them to paper in what was just a basic intelligence report, and I took it to a senior officer. And what I must say, that this isn't the first time that I'd been shut down for exposing child abuse offences. A couple of years prior to that, if I may jump the timeline, I was on an inquiry looking into transient paedophiles that had failed to register, and I found out that they were residing on canal boats within the inland waterway network of the UK. They had information from within the prison service that there were 2 paedophiles that were living on boats. Now, boats had a lot of poignancy in as much as there was freedom to travel. The canal network was very, very old and therefore didn't get policed, and children like boats. And the BBC had a programme at the time which sort of it was to do with 2 little dolls that lived on a canal boat called Rosie and Jim, and it was tied in at the same time as I was looking into this, so kids were drawn to the waterways. I'll get back to the main story, but the reason for telling this bit was that I was told that there were 2 sex offenders. I was asked to look into it as a field intelligence officer, and if I found another 2 within a set period of time, they'd be happy. Within that period of time, I'd found 90. I came into work.
Now, was it 90 victims or 90 perpetrators?
Offenders. I was looking into this, so kids were drawn to the waterways. I'll get back to the main story, but the reason for telling this bit was that I was told that there were 2 sex offenders. I was asked to look into it as a field intelligence officer, and if I found another 2 within a set period of time, they'd be happy. Within that period of time, I'd found 90. I came into work, and I was told by a high-ranked officer that the inquiry had been shut down, and the reason given was that they couldn't afford the funding for me. But I had been approached by a Scotland Yard detective who told me, he said, when you investigate any crime and you do well at it, you get praised. When you look into child abuse cases, the opposite happens. Be very careful. He then told me about a cabinet minister that they'd investigated on a few occasions, and on each occasion they'd been shut down. So I was aware that this had gone on. When I questioned the senior officer about, the real reason, he told me, John, I'm so sorry, it's come from high up. There's nothing I can do, and promised me any job I wanted. So I moved on to the vice unit. So I was expecting to be praised for what I found out. Each day a new child will be found, and it was just spiralling. I was brought before someone who is now a very, very high-ranked officer in the UK indeed, and he sat me down and he said, John, I've got to be very upfront with you. And I said, well, I'd like to be upfront with you.
Okay, I was brought before very high-ranking...
Very high-ranked officer in the UK.
Officer in the UK.
Indeed. Someone who is now a very, very high-ranked officer in the UK indeed. And he sat me down and he said, John, I've got to be very upfront with you. And I said, well, I'd like to be upfront with you, Governor, as well. And he said, you know, you're, out of all the officers I've got here, there was about, 40 officers. He said, you're the second best one I've got, which was a good accolade. He said, but unfortunately, you've dug too deep. What the hell have you done? Now, on a personal level, since the beginning of 2000, I'd brought up 4 children on my own, and this was common knowledge within my unit. And he said to me, if you ever disclose what you found out, you will lose your home, your children, and your job. You must shut the F up. And he said, you will be thrown to the wolves. You have no idea who and what you are dealing with. He said, I'm warning you now, you must back away. And then he said something quite strange, and he said that if you say a word of this, and even if you make a complaint, it will come back to me and it will go in the bin. I and no one else will ever betray fellow rank. Shut your mouth. So I walked away from that investigation and I moved on. I was offered to stay, but I couldn't. What was very strange was that the main witness, the young girl that came forward, was found dead in the street very shortly afterwards on a suspicious drug overdose, which sort of compounded matters. I then moved on to work on child abuse investigations, which is slightly different to vice, and I can, if I have the time, explain why there is this compartmentalisation within these institutions. And it's all down to remits and justifiable reasons for actually doing nothing as opposed to doing something. I went on to a child abuse unit in one of the poorer boroughs of London, and I was asked if I would like, as well as an investigator, take on a second role dealing with various sort of issues they have. And I was told you'll get a day here and there to go to a meeting, and I asked to look into if anyone was dealing with children's homes. I was told no, there was an officer that was dealing with children's homes, but she left 2 years ago and she didn't do anything anyway because nothing happens, there's no problem. And I asked this sergeant, are there any problems with child prostitution within the kids' homes? He said, what you on about? No, of course not. I got a list, and this is almost real time as I'm telling it now. I got a list faxed through to me from social services with all the children's homes. There was 26 kids' homes. I picked up the phone and I spoke to the fella and I asked him how many kids they have. And on an average, there's about 5 children reside in this children's home. And I said, no, I'm not pointing the finger. No one's in any trouble. How many of these children do you lose at the weekend? Which is the usual pattern of missing, you know, when kids go missing. And so out of the 5, we lose 3. And I said, no, honestly, what happens to them? They went, oh, they're being pimped out. So I'd found this officer that had dealt with it for years had found none. Within this, honestly, this was the time, as we're speaking now, within this period of minutes, I found 3. By the end of that day, I'd found 6. By the end of 3 days to 5 days, I'd found 50. I held a meeting with all the concerned agencies, which involved charities, which involved NGOs, which involved social services, and I highlighted the problem. And I was then harangued, really. I was attacked verbally by head of children's services for this borough, saying to me, what the effing hell have you done? And I said, well, you knew about these kids. I said, yeah, but they hadn't come notice, so we're not worried. The children were making money, so therefore the children weren't worried. The children had a boyfriend, which was their pimp. Therefore, they thought this was love. And the children were also using drugs, so therefore they want to continue to use drugs, so they weren't coming to notice. So therefore social services had written them off, despite the fact that the children's homes would constantly be getting in the logs that they were being picked up and they were going missing. These were regular missing persons The police have a missing persons unit. They say so many thousands of kids go missing every year. They do, but a lot of them do return. But what is never looked into is what happens when they're going missing. They are working as prostitutes. And again, the child abuse units won't look into them because they say it's not interfamilial, because it's someone else pimping them out. The bigger cities have vice units. Vice units will not deal with them because they say that these are kids subject to care orders. So no one looks into it, and it goes on and it festers and it festers. And then funny enough, after this meeting, I was shut down and moved again. I then came forward a couple of years later. I was actually genuinely concerned that I would lose my children. I know how powerful the police are, and I know what they're capable of, having worked with them. I blew the whistle a few years ago, and I was told that my allegations would be taken at the highest level. I asked to speak to a high-ranked female detective, and this was questioned. And then they did get me a high-ranked female detective, and she said to me, "Why are you talking to me and no one else?" I said, "Because you cannot roll up your trouser leg." And she said, "I understand exactly what you mean." They instigated allegations of corruption against high-ranked officers. When you investigate these crimes, as a witness and informant as I was, you're meant to get regular updates every 28 days. I never received one in 3 years. The matter was passed from one unit to another unit. It ended up with the IPCC, who again did nothing and failed to update me despite the fact that they had corroborating evidence. I met with other police whistleblowers via a few concerned MPs. One of them was a lady called Maggie Oliver, who had exposed the scandal in Rochdale. Another one was a man called Lenny Harper, who had exposed the horrendous goings on at a kids' home called Hope de la Garenne in Jersey. Each one of them echoed each other. They both said they're going to come for you, and they will come hard. And I said, "What do I expect?" They said, "Right, you will be served with gross misconduct papers. You will be interviewed, they will find against you, you will be sacked, and you will probably face a court case and may go to jail." Now, the threats that was echoed to me: you'll lose your home, your job, your children. At the same time, the police stopped paying me. I went without wages for nearly 3 years. I had 4 children at home. Then what happened was that they served me gross misconduct papers, and I was told what it will be for data protection violations, which seems to be a common occurrence. I got served with numerous data protection violations. Each one could have given me a 2-year prison sentence. And this continued and continued. Now, what also happened during this period was that one of my children was involved in a life-changing and catastrophic accident in which he was initially declared dead. They revived him. He was on life support for many, many months. I got a call from the hospital to attend the hospital where they had actually lost him. He'd been dead for 10 minutes. So I was called down to the hospital to basically identify him. I turned up and they had actually revived him within this period, but they deemed him as brain dead, although he was on full 100% life support. A colleague of mine was so concerned, as I had no money, and for 3 days I slept in my car and stayed by my son's side. My son actually made signs of life, and I was able to return home. But my colleague had brought this to the attention of senior officers, just saying, you've got to help this man. He's actually done nothing wrong. The Met Police's response to this, when I got home, they'd sent 2 child protection officers round to interview my youngest boy on allegations that I left him home alone while I was with my dying son. So the threats of you will lose your home, your job and your children rang true. I persisted. I refused to give up, and I set up a forum, a working group with all the police whistleblowers, and it extended and it branched out. The IPCC stopped investigating the crime. I was meant to be given a full breakdown of what went on, and I was given a 1-paragraph letter and told not to contact them again. We're not investigating it. Their answer was that the 3 high-ranked officers that I'd accused of corruption, they went and spoke to them and they denied it, and that was the extent of their investigation. And all them years as an investigator, I've been doing it wrong. We've just got to ask someone if they've done it, and if they say no, that's it. And that was what they expected me to swallow, and told me not to contact them again. I took the matter to the policing minister at the time, a member of the Privy Council and a member of the government's cabinet. He met with me, and he was actually, to my surprise, appalled. He arranged for a meeting with the Home Office. The Home Office then got their independent investigation team involved and stated that there will be an independent investigation into my claims. And they deemed that the Met Police and the IPCC had failed, and they will look into it. I was summoned to a meeting, and it was a fully recorded meeting, and it was witnessed, and in which the Cabinet Minister handed my paperwork over to the Home Office officials, and that was an official handover of the paperwork which I supplied to him. They then gave me their assurances that they will be in touch with me and give me a 24-hour contact number, and said they will investigate this independently. I never heard from them again. They have since denied receiving any paperwork. When pushed, they admitted they did receive it, but have now lost it. We are seeing police failings in respect to child prostitution hemorrhaging in this country, but we are seeing them on a provincial level. We're seeing them in Rochdale, Blackpool, Rotherham. We're seeing them in Oxford, Aylesbury, Swindon, all on a provincial level. London is one of the largest urban conurbations in the Western world. It has got one of the biggest police forces. We haven't heard one thing about organised child prostitution in London, and the reason being is that those high up have been covering it up, and this goes right to the heart. I was met with, as I said, Lenny Harper. Children were killed at Haute de la Garenne, in which Lenny Harper had forensic evidence, which was then went missing. And he said to me, be careful, what you're looking at will go right to the heart of the establishment. I sat down with the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Cressida Dick, and I explained to her what was going on. And I explained the dynamics of how you groom a child. I said, I can take a child out of the care system. I can groom that child. I can have sex with that child. I can get my friends to have sex with that child. I can pimp that child out. You have not appointed one officer to investigate that. Yet if I leant over my fence and called my neighbour a derogatory term, I'd lose my home, my job, I'd be signing on a register, and I'd never work for the Met Police again. How is that justifiable? How is it justifiable? I now work with victims and survivors of abuse. I help out with recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. I'm working in collusion now with one of the most notorious gangsters the UK had, and the convicted murderer, Chris Lambriano. And I've never had such support and compassion from these people, yet the police would have had me swinging from a rope if they've had their own way. When we look at our prison service, we look at our prison system, 75% of inmates are illiterate. This is in the UK, they're illiterate. 75% of our inmates have come from abused backgrounds. We have a recidivism rate of 75%. The system does not work. Child abuse is at the root of all of this. Child abuse units, when I was on them, I've worked on many specialist units in the police. I've worked on units that have been anti-government. I've worked on units that have been financial crime. You get given a car. You get given an expense account. You get given unlimited overtime. When I was on child abuse, we had a car between 10 of us. I worked with 3 alcoholics because the work was so horrendous and impactful. We had no respite. We were worked till we were dropping, and we would have appointments to see psychiatrists every 6 months, but they weren't to sign us off. They were to keep us going, to say, "Oh, you're all right. You're all right. Keep going. Keep going." They deliberately underfund anything to do with child abuse, deliberately, and it's done for a reason. I had many informants that came from the street. They were beggars. They were drug addicts. They had all been sexually abused as children. One of them told me of a scenario when he was in a kids' home at the age of 4, was raped on his first night by a Catholic priest. He then went on to be raped daily and whipped and beaten. He became a drug addict, and he ended up as a rent boy on the street at an area of the West End where I used to work as a vice copper. And that was what was classed as the meat rack in Piccadilly Circus, where young boys were openly picked up for the purpose of prostitution. It was known about. He went to get in a car, and he was in trouble. He needed drugs, so he needed the money. And he had a pimp, and he said a pimp wasn't a bad thing. A pimp actually looked after me. I was safer with a pimp on the street than I was in a kid's home. He went to get into a car, which was a white Rolls Royce with 2 men in it. And his pimp said, don't go in that car. The last 2 boys went in there. They killed them. We never saw them again. He gesticulated for the driver to drive around the block. And his pimp didn't see this. His pimp thought he'd walked away. But he didn't. He got in the car. He was then taken to a very affluent part of London called Hampstead. He was then subjected to 3 days of torture and sexual violence, in which he said that they knew that they'd killed him. And he said they dumped his lifeless body on Hampstead Heath by the Royal Free Hospital, believing he was dead. And he said, what shocked me more, John, was the fact that these 2 men, they were well dressed, they had a big house, and they were actually getting ready to go to their niece's wedding whilst they were dropping my lifeless body off, perceived lifeless body off, on a bit of heath ground. Yet it goes on consistently. Back in 2003, the justice system brought in what they called the Bad Character Act. Before, you could never bring in someone's previous convictions within a legal trial in the UK, unless it was a very, very serious one, and then it was very difficult. There were too many legal parameters. They brought this in, and everyone thought that it was a coup. It was a step forward in gaining justice. But when you commit acts, minor acts of shoplifting, it's dishonest crime. You are then deemed a dishonest person. Every person I dealt with, every street person, every crack-taking prostitute had been abused as a child. They all committed dishonest crime to stay alive. Right? They shoplifted. They pimped themselves. Whatever they did it to survive, to buy their drugs, to carry on. So whenever they were brought in a trial as a witness, they were instantly deemed as dishonest. And this is what we're seeing now when people are coming forward. They are rubbish and they're broken. And one of the startling things that occurred was back in the beginning of 2000, they brought over Mayor Giuliano from New York to preach to us on a thing called the broken window theory. And what his theory was that if there was an area that of depravity that had a broken window or a damaged bus shelter, clean it up, smarten it up. You won't get your drug dealers, you won't get your shoplifters, you won't get your robberies, that all these crimes that are in the periphery around sort of poverty and everything else. And therefore, your society gets better. Smarten these broken windows up. It was naive at the least. Where is this timeline taken back? The fact is they're doing drugs because they're paying for heroin. They're on heroin because heroin is an analgesic. It's a painkiller. Pain can be mental, emotional, as well as physical. And the majority of them were there doing the drugs because they come from the care system. The care system that had appallingly let them down, and that they had been sexually abused, and they had no way of processing the damage that had been done to them. Our judicial system sets them up to fail. It follows them through from cradle to grave. These kids are known about, yet nothing happens. They grow up, they become bad in class, they become violent. They get reported to the social services, yet the problem is still not addressed. They then commit minor acts and end up before the juvenile courts. Again, nothing is done. They commit then heavier acts, robberies or whatever, and end up before the magistrates' courts, yet nothing is done. They end up before the Crown Courts, and ultimately they end up going before the coroner's courts. Yet throughout all this circle, nothing ever breaks it. The people that are paid a good living wage to stop this are failing it. And sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's apathy, sometimes it's ignorance. I've just come back from Rotherham, a town a small steel town in the northwest cluster of the UK. I met with a social worker who had exposed the child prostitution problem. She ran an outreach group, and the kids would come into her, and then one would tell her another, and she looked into it. It was organised prostitution. It's a small little town. 2,000 children were being pimped out. She got attacked. She got attacked from the police. Her husband nearly lost his job. It nearly brought her to this point of suicide. And this is what they do. It's orchestrated, and it was manipulated at the highest echelons. And she said it was coming from the high-ranking officers, and it was. But yet all they would offer up would be the lower-ranking officers for some form of malfeasance, whatever. But it is being orchestrated at the very top. My investigation showed a strong link with high-ranked officers and organised criminals. I spoke with another child abuse investigator in a quite high-ranked officer, and I spoke to him from Manchester. Again, he had a proven link between high-ranked officers and organised criminals and child prostitution there. We had a glimmer of hope in the form of a chief constable, a commissioner of police for a county called Wiltshire. The man's name is Mike Veal. He stood up and he investigated child prostitution, child trafficking, child abuse, everything else, but it involved former Prime Minister Ted Heath. He turned around in Parliament and he said, if they can attack me, because he come under attack, and he said he came under attack from places he didn't even know existed. And he said, if they can attack me, God knows what they'll do to John Wedger, which in a way was a bit of an accolade. And I spoke to him and he said, it's just vile, John. It is vile. I then looked at how many police officers, the policeman's biggest fear is going to prison. And they know it. They know it. This is deliberate. What we're looking at is deliberate. I was a good guy. When you're a policeman, you take an oath, and your oath is, I will act without fear or without favour. Someone said to me, John, do not base your own bravery on others. Don't judge others for the lack of bravery and commitment shown. I do not see myself as brave. I see myself as a man who believes in protecting the vulnerable, doing God's work, and doing what my oath said, to act without fear or without favour. They are going against their oath. And I said, we will look at this word fear, shall we? What are they frightened of? Telling the truth. Where the real fear lies is this young child laying in a kid's home at night, and they're coming and they're taking the blankets from over him. That's the real fear. You know, we need to get a grip. You come under attack, and you do come under attack, and it's painful when it hurts. And it does do its best to destroy you. Maggie Oliver said to me, John, I was going to prison. The CPS turned round and said, we've got enough evidence. If you don't come to some agreement, admit to whatever, then you're found guilty, you will go to prison. She had to tell her children she was going to prison. The CPS in the end with me turned around and said, John Wedger's mitigation was so powerful, we could never convict him. I said to them, I submitted my statement prior to any trial. I wrote a statement and I gave it to Cressida Dick and said, here's my statement. Whatever you say I've done, I've done. I don't care. But I will not be tried by you. I will be tried in a Crown Court. And I will be tried by my peers, and I will be tried fairly. I've done nothing wrong, and I listed every single person from the bottom right the way up to the top. Who was involved, who knew about it, who did nothing, who then did nothing, who did nothing. This went right up to Bernard Hogan-Howe and now to Cressida Dick. Bernard Hogan-Howe knew about this. The campaign of bullying on me was orchestrated under his command. He has now been appointed by the House of Lords to look into child grooming gangs and how they existed. Well, I might save him the trouble. I can do that for him. You know, it is wrong. It is wrong there. Looking now, I was asked to make an address to Lord Pearson's office regarding the presence of grooming gangs and how it works, how it's the mechanics of it all. They're looking at it from a very sort of religious background, that it's Muslim gangs. This is a bigger picture. This is a bigger picture. Kids are a commodity. And one of the things which I want to refer back to is yourself, Commissioner, to my right, mentioned about the Marc Dutroux. Whenever I give a talk, you have to make things relevant. We don't look at the third world and how they're dealing with things because there are different people. They look different. They drive on a different side of the road. They look a different colour. Let's look at what we got on our backyard. One of the countries that's demographically very similar to us is Belgium. In living memory, it went on in Belgium, and it went on with Marc Dutroux. And the kids that came forward were so pigeonholed in what they could talk about. Anything that went outside of Marc Dutroux, they weren't allowed. I think it was 23 to 25 civilian witnesses died in the lead up to the trial.
90.
Unbelievable.
Total 90.
Absolutely unbelievable, yep. And then the people took the power back. They blew the windows out with the fire engines of the parliamentary office, and then they sprayed horse manure all over the building, and they took to the streets, didn't they? 500,000 people. 500,000 people. And what do? We only kick off when someone throws a cat in a wheelie bin. If we allow our children to be attacked and preyed on in this way, we have failed as a decent and moral society. And we are doing that. And we are doing nothing. It has to stop. And they have to back. I don't want no glory, but people like myself, we need backing. And we need it.
Absolutely.
The Commonwealth Parliament in Australia passed an act called the Public Interest Disclosure Act to protect whistleblowers. The act says quite clearly that if you blow the whistle on corruption or whatever you blow it on, you cannot be charged with another offence in retaliation for what you've done. 2 Supreme Court judges in Australia have said the act does not apply.
Well, it's the same with the police. They are not subject to any employment law. They just do what they want. Yes. And when we look at suicides, the Office of National Statistics will not keep any information on police suicides. We went to Boston, and police suicides are twice that of any high-risk occupation. These coppers are so worried of going to prison, they commit suicide, and it happens.
I just make the point as well that us barristers are under the same oath of fear of favour, and we're very glad to take your testimony, and we will act.
Oh, God bless you.
God bless you too.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hutzabat, who's a criminologist and psychotherapist, has a question for you.
Yeah, a question, not really a question, more of a statement and a question. If the $1 million Robert was speaking about would have been used and will be used for people like you, supporting you when you lose your jobs and you have no income for your children, would that make a big difference for other officers to talk and do what they have to do, their jobs? That's my question.
It's financial bullying, and they know it, and they do, and that's why they do it. And one of the strange things which happened to myself and another whistleblower was my bank account was shut down for no reason. That's the second, and I know someone else, but it would. You need to live, and it was the fact that good people funded me, and got me through it. But
would it help you and other whistleblowers and people that want to do their job if this commission succeeds in gathering money to financially help your families? Would that help people coming forward to do their jobs, to be able to, because we have to change the system from within. But if people like you, police officers, under oath, wanting to help people, or not even in the possibility to do your jobs, well, then it's finished, isn't it? And it is finished, if we are honest, it is finished. Yep. The system failed over the whole line. Also healthcare, everything that has to do with children failed, and that's planned. But the question is, do you think that more people like you would continue doing their jobs, even with all the pressure they have, if they know that if something happens, there will be a backup for their families, protecting their families, and money to survive? Do you think that more people would come forward and continue their jobs?
I'd like to say yes. The one thing is, it's the police pension. You look at losing your pension. And that's what does it. That's what keeps them in silence. But you do need money, and also recourse to some sort of legal assistance. The Police Federation each legal firm they gave me refused to take my case on. I went independent. They took me on straight away. Straight away.
You're present.
John, as a former spy, we're obscenely proud of having the highest rates of alcoholism, adultery, divorce, and suicide. So I do understand to a certain extent. I am so deeply moved by your testimony and your integrity. Why haven't you been killed?
I don't know. Jesus loves me. Well, hopefully, I've got a few more years. I've got a job to do. Got a job to do. There's a great power.
John, thank you very much indeed for this testimony. Did it reach the media in the UK? This is one question. Second, have you been approached, asked, questioned by one of the chat leaders in there?
I'm glad you asked that. The media, one of my saving graces, and it didn't meant to happen. Something Sasha mentioned the other day to me was about doing a testimony and keeping it for legal purposes. I actually did an interview with the UK column with a man called Brian Gerrish, and he said it was too hot to handle and put it out online. And I thought, oh my God, what's he done? But it actually saved me. It saved me. So the alternative media really did help me. When I left, the national media have been okay. There's been a couple of good journalists. One of the journalists has tried to move it forward, but gone now to a different paper, and they won't touch me. But the other thing is, I'm a Catholic, and I wrote to Vincent Nichols, and he said, nothing I can do. So other Catholics got together and wrote to him and said, why? If you can't do anything, then why are you there? And he said, I'll see what I can do. And he said he couldn't get involved. And I said, but you got involved with the McCann case. Why can't you get involved here? And this is what you find with all these departments that claim to have ownership for supporting people. They are useless, they do nothing. And I was appalled by Vincent Nichols. I thought the man showed no integrity, nothing. However, on the local level, Priest has been very, very good. And also, there's been a few Christian groups that have been phenomenally good. And there's also been a group of Orthodox Jews in New York have raised quite a lot of money for me as well. So it's come from everywhere and really supportive, but on a lower level though.
Thank you, John. Commissioner Helstein, a very brief question. We're running so late. Thank you.
Really brief, and I will explain why I'm asking so briefly. As you practically were in that flame, in that horror, and in that danger, and you really are touching very nearly. So maybe your intuition, your mind, your all human said, what is the force from the society, from the court, from everywhere, which could help you to solve the cases like this, like many these cases? What were you dreaming of? A force, okay, because you felt helpless. I'm sorry for that word.
No, that's good. I wanted the platform. I've been threatened and bullied into silence. It was a conspiracy of silence. I was screaming inside. The world needed to know. And one of the biggest gifts we have been given in the UK, which this man didn't deem it as a gift. He actually, was the Jimmy Savile thing. He inadvertently did God's work to such a degree, and it opened up really the middle classes in this country to the fact this was going on. And someone said to me, do you find that your world gets so small when you deal with this? And I said, explain. It went, well, no one wants to talk about it. Can we not talk about it, please? Can we not hear it? Can we not? And it's getting it out there. And then when you realise that you're not mad, it's not a conspiracy. And when you do get those that have been affected by it, I gave a talk to 50 recovering alcoholics and drug addicts, some of which were people of extreme violence. There was a fear that I would be attacked in the room for giving this talk. Some of these people had served time for murder and torture. They got up, they applauded me, and they hugged me. And it was one of the most life-defining moments I've ever met. And that was my real audience, saying, I'm doing it because you need it.
Thank you for that. I'm so sorry, I have to call time now. John Wedger, this commission salutes you. Thank you so much for attending today.
Right. Okay. So I think I've got down the majority of the key points from that chat, that talk at that tribunal. Out of curiosity, I'm just going to copy and send this into Google and just give myself some more information on it. So it's Indonesia FAQs. It's established 2015. And it's international. Right, so lovely jubbly. Right, just address chat as well, because obviously I didn't want to interrupt that whilst that was going on. Nice to see you, Lucy Brown, if you're still here. Venus Rising, good to see you as well. Yeah, it's been a tough time for him. Andrew Frost, you might want to put this document in multiple places and other multiple people, just in case something happens to you. Delightful thought. Measures have been taken, and certain people do have access to copies of the document, which will be released in that event via another source, but I don't want to put it up so that it can just be taken down in another place. I don't want them to know where it's coming from. At the moment, I'm happy with it being where it is. Right, now John Wedger has obviously had this. The key case study that he brought was this, where is it? Woman, all of them drug addicts picked up by a female prostitute well known to the Met with local connections. Now, if I go to John Wedger, literally just debunked, because I was pretty sure someone had attempted to do something. We're not going to watch this one, but they link to a document. I think it's just there's 3 of them. So they claim he lied about this one case. How credible is he? Now, I don't know anything about this organisation in particular, but let's have a look and see what they have as well, because I'm hoping as well to have a chat with John Wedger, but I need to understand the allegations against him as well at the same time. So, Wedger's foxy story, not the cover-up he claims. Let's see. You wonder about his story of a woman named Foxy, who he claimed was grooming and trafficking teenage girls. This was the first woman here from that inquiry, from that panel, I should say. She'd made an allegation. This woman, Foxy, had been pimping her out. She'd made a couple of allegations. They hadn't gone anywhere. So what I was told was, can you look into it? She's made allegations before. She's a bit of a nightmare. She might be lying, but she might not. But she's a bit persistent. See what you can do. So I went, okay. So I went to see the girl, made an appointment, and was told she's very anti-police, a bit of a handful. We sat down, we had a chat, we interviewed her. She told me the story start to finish. She's the product of a broken family. Mum's a drug addict, father was absent, mother was buying drugs off a girl called Foxy, and Foxy started to groom her because her mother was unable to look after her. Ended up living with her grandparents, but this was in a red light district. So Foxy would go pick her up, look after her, show her some attention, a bit of love, do her hair, give her makeup, give her some weed, and then would take her to hotels, the sort of places where a lot of the builders would go to, converted Victorian houses or whatever. In one area of London, there was a big row of them, and a lot of them there were. Maintenance and building workers from the north would come down and stay in these hotels. The night porters would make a room available for her. She would take her clients in there, go in with the client, have sex, and the young girl would watch, and then she would be encouraged to get involved. From there, she would start giving the girl bigger drugs, Class A drugs. Once especially, they'd got on crack cocaine, they've got a grip on them, the girl had no way of getting off the drugs, she relied on Foxy as a medicine lady, and so she was on crack cocaine. She was then pimped out, getting the young girl involved, and she would get the girl to introduce her friends to it. So then she was introducing her friends, also coming from families that the parents were drug addicts or absent, whatever. And so in the care system, in fact, all the kids we dealt with were subject to care orders. Again, mirroring what we've just listened to. So she gave me the name of another kid. So I went to see that girl, the story was identical. And I used to say, well, what about the police? Did the police ever get involved? And both would say, well, we would be hidden in a bush if we were put on the street. If the police came, Foxy would hide us in the bush. She knew the coppers anyway, would flirt with them, and they would just let her go. But there's also a judge involved. I said, what do you mean? She went, oh, a judge at the magistrate's court. So when Foxy's charge goes before the judge is her client anyway. So the judge just lets her off. So I checked this out, went through the disposal history, the criminal history of this girl, and found she keeps getting bindovers, this Foxy. So I thought, right, well, there's something in this. So It has a ring of truth right up until the point where she would find herself in front of a particular magistrate who happened to be a client. In fact, this is not how the magistrate court works. If a person is sent to magistrate's court, they don't get a choice of which judge they get, and the judges don't choose their cases, they get assigned. According to Wedger, his superior officers reacted to this case by insisting he stop pursuing it, putting him on stress leave, and then threatening if he didn't leave the case alone, he would lose everything. And all that stuff, we've already heard that. All very Serpico, but Wedger's bosses did not intervene, apparently. So apparently Foxy is a woman named Fiona Walsh. Thanks, Tom of Gulf City, by the way. Appreciate the comment. Whose real name is Fiona Walsh, is a woman from West Kilburn, arrested in 2006. In 2007, she was tried and convicted on an 18-count indictment, which included 1 count of causing a child to engage in sexual activity, supplying her with crack cocaine, and attempting to procure a second youngster to have unlawful sexual intercourse, and supplying her with hard drugs. She pleaded guilty to supplying Class A substances in Holloway Prison. Again, BBC article here claiming this one. Believe up to 5 girls may have fallen into her clutches, all of whom ended up running away from home for up to 2 years. 1 is undergoing psychiatric treatment. She admitted 4 charges from the 18. And yes, so there's that. Right. Now, this is quite similar to Wedger's version, which is the one which we claim, including 5 girls here, and young girls, and crack cocaine, and other stuff. Right. So, aside from the fact that Walsh's story is virtually identical to the tale told by Wedger, how do we know that they're the same person? It received a lot of media coverage, twice by BBC, Metro and the Irish Examiner, as well as Lifestyle Extra, which says that her street name was Foxy. That was her nickname. Interesting that instead of citing Walsh by her real name, which would have made the story easy for everybody to verify, Wedger chose to use her nickname, accessible only at an obscure Wayback Machine site. So there's that. And obviously the comments are all like, "Oh, thanks for the clarification," etc. So I would like to sit down with him really and have a chat about this particular case, because unfortunately, as much as we want to get credible sources, we want to listen and believe, especially when it comes to, I'm sure the man believes what he's saying. I mean, he's gone through hell, clearly. Not only from the hands of some people, but obviously his detractors and stuff going on. But I've seen no evidence in his in his character or in his story to suggest that he hasn't been struggling with this stuff. And the amount of information that he's bringing to bear. Now, if this is the only flaw in his story, then it's the only flaw in his story, and for whatever reason, but it's clear that he seems to have a wealth of information. There's a lot of people who are claiming that he basically is doing this not just for the attention, but he's struggling financially, and also because he's a bit of a narcissist, but I, again, haven't seen that. And if you look at something like Twitter, where he has something like 8,000 Twitter followers, I don't see that being a primary factor. Seeing as he's not famous, he's not a household name, he's not even attempting to be that. So the claim is that he claimed that she kept getting off. The media case claims that this woman, Fiona Walsh, she was tried, she was convicted to 10 years in prison, and it was well covered. So there's that. They have the court notices from her appeals and all the more information there. And that's that, right? So apparently Wedger is playing a very nasty game, but I don't know about that. As for corruption allegations, let's see what we've got here. What's SRA case? Over the past year and a half, John Wedger keeps talking about police corruption at highest levels. He claims that the Met deliberately covers up sexual abuse of children and that he suffers PTSD. He's been dismissed from the forces, attempting to sue for psychiatric injury. So, in 2014, let's see. So there's apparently a hoax, but I don't know anything about an SRA hoax or what SRA means. So there's that sort of thing. Although apparently he helped close the case. His current affiliations with hoax pushers. We don't know whether or not he's dodgy. Oh, satanic ritual abuse, thank you. As I say, Wedger doesn't come across to me as incredible or uncredible. Police response to child sexual abuse has been tepid. He received a commendation for his outstanding work on the Baby P case. There's the Foxy issue. His interactions with his bosses seem drawn from B-grade police thrillers. And I got a phone call within about an hour of the report going through from Governing Detective Inspector. And he said to me, John, about this report you put on, I was thinking, good, brilliant, I've now shown the gooses that it's given the golden eggs, hopefully this will move forward. I thought I was going to get praised. He said, we need to speak. He said, what have you done? You can't do things like this. I'm shutting you down, I'm taking you off, and withdrew me straight away from the operation. Then there's the thrown to the wolves. But he claims that in the non-conspiranoid world, people don't see things like, you have no understanding how deep this goes. We knew you could dig, but we never knew you could dig that deep. It seems that this, if he had truly caused concern, he would have been quietly and discreetly reassigned. Just doesn't strike us as realistic. Claims he got PTSD. Claims he got cumulative PTSD. I don't trust these people to have a solid grasp of what PTSD entails, seeing as they have no qualification that they are in any way psychiatrically or psychologically trained. So the only people who could claim that for me is some of my comments, some of my colleagues, sorry. But I don't know. So we'll have to contact him and ask him directly how he wants to address this. Obviously, as part of these the allegations that he makes at that panel, several times he mentions correspondence. So I'm hoping to be able to get some of that out of him as well, so that we have plenty of written and solid evidence that's there. All right. Let me just look at SRA hoax. And which one was it specifically? SRA hoax Hampstead. It was a claim that there was a satanic cult in which babies were murdered and children sexually abused. And it was bunkum. There we go. So they claimed. Alright. Right. We've been going now for 3 hours or so. I think that's about... Yeah, I think can't help thinking this is becoming a bit tangential to the Grooming Gang issue. Yeah, absolutely. This is more to do with John Wedger, whether or not he's a credible witness, credible source. I will get in contact with him via Twitter. Hope to arrange something in the next couple of weeks where we can have a chat. Whether or not that will be on air or off air remains to be seen. If it's off air, then obviously you'll see it, or aspects of it from that could be corroborated in the finished product. But that's that. We've obviously been going now for 3 hours. That's about as much as I can take today, unfortunately. But good stuff, a good find, and another few pages added to the document. Alrighty then. Thank you very much to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to everyone who watched and continues to join me on this journey, where hopefully we should be able to find out more information. Take care, everyone, and have a great Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your week. I will see you hopefully tomorrow for Fake Accents Unite at the usual time of 8:30. Take care, everyone. Good night.